What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about a pretty interesting God of War Ragnarok story, and this all comes from an interview, and actually, this tweet kind of sums it up the best. This comes from MinMax in an early draft for God of War Ragnarok. Thor killed Kratos, and Atreus had to rescue him from hell 20 years later. Check out our full interview with Santa Monica's narrative director, Matt, and story lead, Richard, for new dev details. And this is a really good interview. I watched the whole thing. They have chapters, so you can kind of jump around, look what you want to look for. Very, very good, honestly. And one of the things they talked about, among a lot of other things, including trying to get them to talk about what they were doing next, was talking about this early concept. Now, the tweet does a good job of summarizing it. If you watch it, it's important to note because here's the thing, okay? I don't love that idea at all. In fact, I really, really don't like that idea. And that's just my opinion. You're free to have whatever opinion you want. But it was very much stressed when the answer was given to the question of, like, was anything radically different? Did you have something you had to cut it? Stuff like that. The answer was kind of started with, all right, this was very early on, and we'll talk about it because it's out, and we would never do it now. But there was an early draft, and I believe the quote was, it was like the earliest draft. This was maybe like one of the first ideas they had for the narrative side of things, of this beginning, and it was basically at the beginning of the game when Thor fights Kratos, Thor would, permanently, I know in the game, they have the neat little mechanic where you'll die and he shocks you back to life with the electricity. Well, that would actually be like a death. You would actually die, and then they would kind of jump forward 20 or so years, and Atreus would be rescuing him. He would try to rescue him from hell, and he would. And it sounded like there was almost a little bit, or they would try to have put in the game, a little bit of time where maybe you didn't know. The way the answer was given made it sound like, well, you maybe would think it's permanent, and then it's not permanent, along those lines. Now, again, I'm very happy this didn't happen because I actually hate that. It's interesting because the reason why they didn't do it is also quite an interesting answer where they pitched it to Eric, and Eric had talked about, well, we talk about him going to die at the end of 2018, and then you would do it kind of right away, and then immediately after you would say, well, he's not dead, so you would lose that entire thing. I agree with that generally. I think in terms of like a theme and kind of like riding the highs and lows, that does make sense why you wouldn't do it, right? Too early, and then if you're immediately going to come out, I think it's more powerful where truly, and I do think they did a really good job of this, throughout the game, you don't know. I mean, you still think it's a possibility Kratos could die, and you get to the end, and at least for me, I was like, please don't kill him, please don't kill him. And they didn't do it, and I was like, thank God. But it was always there, like that theme and the idea of change, of Kratos changing, right? Trying to, do you just kind of go along with the prophecy? Do you do things differently? I think that was actually very powerful, and that was really central to the game. So losing that in the beginning, that would obviously hurt. A couple other things that I would also just kind of throw in there. Well, actually, I think they said it as well. Another reason they didn't do it is they threw out the argument that, well, Kratos has died before and kind of come back. I agree with that. I don't think that's as big of a deal, and I guess I'm assuming, right? I don't know how big of a deal they made that when they were rejecting the idea. Were they like, oh man, this would really upset people if we just did the same thing again? I think people were almost, not necessarily like willing, but they were willing to allow it to happen just because they knew that he would come back. Does that make sense? I almost feel like there was like a side from me that was like very afraid you would permanently kill him. Then there was a side that was like, well, he'll never die. He's always going to be around. And I do think there's been interviews where they talked about, Kratos immortal and they would never kill him anyway. But then there was another group that I honestly feel was like, yeah, if you kill him, well, he's died before, so he would just come back. And I feel like that group was actually okay with it, where it's like you'd be okay with if he died, that you would just then bring him back afterwards. So I don't know if that would have been as negative, let's say, as they maybe would have thought it would. I would say, hearing it out loud, my first and my biggest reason why I wouldn't want it is it's a bait and switch. No matter how short it is, it just feels like a lot of other things that have happened before, whether it be games or movies or whatever, in the last like 5 or so years. It just would, not that you can't do it, not that it can't be done well, right? Not saying it immediately is a bad idea, but it just feels so familiar to what we've seen. And honestly, it makes me kind of immediately think of The Last of Us Part 2, right? Kind of selling you on the idea of one thing to immediately stop that and focus on something else. Now, this would have been different, and I guess I would have, playing it through, if this would have happened, it would have maybe redeemed itself, right? Possibly, because unlike, say, The Last of Us or anything, right? If a movie brings back signature characters and kind of markets the movie on it, and then those characters are kind of like backdrop, it's really about like the new guys, and you may know that, you may not. The movie may be trying to sneak that in on you. It kind of just feels like that, right? Not that we'd be unwilling to play as Atreus. In fact, I think the way they did it in this game was awesome. Atreus plays really well. I love using him. I love his powers. I love his abilities, all that stuff. You don't need to do, and maybe bait and switch isn't the right word, but you don't need to give us this guy, Kratos, that we all love so much, and then immediately, in the beginning of the game, he's gone. Oh my, and then you have to play now because you eliminated one, right? I think there's a difference between what they did in this game with kind of organically going back between Kratos and Atreus back and forth, while the other one is still living, right? They're still doing things, and then you just kind of swap to the other one, again, an organic way. There's a difference between that, where you feel like, all right, I'll try out Atreus. We'll go back to Kratos, I'm sure, but this is a cool little thing. There's that, and then there's, oh, you just killed this character. Maybe you immediately tell us that he's alive, maybe you don't, and then you immediately give us to Atreus because there's no other character. Who else are you going to play as, right? So you have to give it to Atreus. So I just feel like no matter how that would feel, it would feel forced in some way. So, again, at the end of the day, I'm complaining, I suppose, about something that didn't happen. I am very happy with the product, the narrative. Now, does that mean the game was perfect? No, I think there was some things you could have, improved upon. But I think I would much rather take what we got, or if you're just talking about the beginning of the game, much rather take what we got versus killing Kratos off in the opening couple hours and then switching to Atreus immediately. And then God knows how that even, progresses. Plus, I suppose, 20 years later. So it really would have been a very different kind of game, right? You would have aged Atreus up so much. So, like, what would have happened? I mean, it kind of would fall apart. Not fall apart, but we wouldn't know. There'd be so many more unknowns after it that it's hard to discuss. But there you go. There was the original, and that, again, that was like one of the earliest concepts. It was immediately shot down, and they pivoted and they did something else, and I'm glad that they did. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure you guys are subscribed, bell icon turned on, and I hope to see you all on the next one.